You black girl! Kitchen's that way!
Whitney Dawson hadn't even closed the door.
I'm here for...
Grab a pitcher and start pouring, now!
They keep wandering in like strays, just ignore her.
Whitney walked to the far end of the table, pulled out a chair and sat down.
Who told you to put your black ass on that seat? Get up. Now.
Whitney looked him dead in the eyes.
You're going to regret that.
The Sterlings were broke. This dinner was their last shot, a $600 million deal with Apex Meridian Capital. The fund's CEO was supposed to walk through that door any minute, but from the moment they hurled that first insult at the quiet black woman, their empire was already beyond saving. 2 hours earlier, Howard Sterling had stood at the head of that same table, adjusting a cufflink that cost more than most people's cars. 71 years old, silver hair combed straight back. The patriarch of Sterling Industries, oil, gas, real estate, a shipping lane in the Gulf, and for the first time in his life, desperate. "Listen to me," he said. His voice was the kind that had fired entire boardrooms without blinking. Apex Meridian Capital is sending a representative tonight. $600 million. That is what is on this table. Do not, I repeat, do not ruin this. Colleen arranged orchids that didn't need arranging. She understood. The Sterling Group was hemorrhaging. 3 failed developments in Nevada. Stock price in freefall. Creditors circling like patient vultures. This deal wasn't an opportunity. It was oxygen. Grant leaned against the doorframe, scrolling his phone. 32. Harvard MBA he barely earned. A corner office he definitely didn't deserve. Relax, Dad. Fun guys are all the same. Flash the projections, pour the good wine, let me talk. I'll close it by dessert. Howard stared at his son. You will smile. You will listen. You will not speak unless I tell you to. Crystal. Howard had imagined the Apex Meridian representative 100 times. Gray suit, firm handshake, maybe a Stanford ring. Someone who spoke his language, the language of old money, golf courses, and boardrooms that smelled like mahogany. Someone who looked like him. He never imagined Whitney Dawson. 37 miles south that same afternoon, Whitney had pulled the navy dress from her closet. Simple cut, no label showing, no diamonds, no heels. She picked up a leather portfolio from her desk, edges worn soft from years of use, initials barely visible. W.D. Her phone buzzed. A text from her CFO, Roland Hayes. Sterling financials are worse than we thought. Debt to equity at 4.3. They're hiding a Nevada land position that's underwater by $200 million. You sure about going in person? That's exactly why I'm going in person. She drove herself. A 6-year-old Honda Accord, dark gray. The kind of car that disappears in a parking lot. The kind nobody looks twice at when it pulls up to a billionaire's estate. Whitney Dawson was the founder and CEO of Apex Meridian Capital. $14 billion under management. Clean energy infrastructure across 3 continents. Forbes had profiled her twice. The Wall Street Journal once called her the quietest force in American finance. Her net worth sat north of $2 billion. None of that was visible tonight. She had learned something early, a rule that never failed. The way people treat you when they think you're nobody tells you everything about who they really are. The Sterlings thought they were interviewing her tonight. They were wrong. She was interviewing them, and so far they were failing. The Honda turned onto the gravel drive. The estate glowed golden against the October dark. Inside, Howard Sterling checked his watch for the 5th time. The representative was late. No, she was already there. Sitting at the far end of his table, in the seat meant for the help, and nobody had a clue. The table settled into an awkward hum after Whitney sat down. Howard cleared his throat and forced the room back to business. He still had a deal to save, whoever this woman claimed to be. We're expecting someone from Apex Meridian, Howard said, directing his voice at Whitney for the first time. He spoke slowly, like explaining directions to a lost tourist. A senior representative. Are you with their team? An assistant, perhaps? I am the representative. Howard blinked. Colleen covered her mouth with her napkin. Grant let out a short, ugly laugh. "You're joking," Grant said. "Dad, she's joking." Whitney opened the leather portfolio, slid a business card across the table. Cream-colored, embossed, simple. Whitney Dawson, founder and CEO, Apex Meridian Capital. Howard picked it up, turned it over, looked at Whitney, looked at the card again. His face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds: confusion, doubt, and something close to nausea. "There must be some kind of mistake," Colleen said. Her smile was still locked in place, but the warmth had drained out of it completely. "We were told the CEO would attend personally." "You were told correctly, Mrs. Sterling." Silence, the kind that presses against your ears. Grant broke it first. He leaned back, crossed his arms, and tilted his chin upward. The universal pose of a man who'd rather choke than admit he was wrong. "Okay, fine, so they made you CEO." He rolled his eyes. "Diversity quota. We all know how that works. They needed a face for the brochure and you checked the right boxes. Congratulations." A woman at the far end of the table, one of the guests, wife of some banking partner, shifted in her seat. She looked at her plate, said nothing. Whitney placed her hands flat on the table. "Mr. Sterling, would you like to continue or should I wait until you're finished?" Grant smirked. "Oh, I'm just getting started, sweetheart." Howard cut in, not to defend Whitney, but to protect the deal. "That's enough, Grant." He turned to Whitney with a smile so forced it looked painful. "Ms. Dawson, forgive my son. He has a sense of humor. Please, let's talk business." But the damage was already spreading. Whitney could see it in the micro-expressions around the table. The way the guests avoided her eyes. The way Colleen's fingers tightened around her wine glass. The way Howard kept glancing at the business card like it might change if he stared long enough. They didn't believe her. Even with the card in hand, even with her name and title printed in black ink, they couldn't make it fit. A black woman, CEO, $14 billion. It didn't match the picture in their heads, and they would rather break reality than update the picture. Howard launched into his pitch. He stood, clicked a remote, and a projector illuminated the far wall with Sterling Group's logo and a slide titled Strategic Partnership Proposal, Confidential. He spoke for 12 minutes straight. Revenue projections climbing at 18%, market share graphs with arrows pointing skyward, glossy renderings of a Nevada solar farm that existed only in PowerPoint. Whitney listened without interrupting. She didn't take notes, didn't nod, didn't react to a single slide. When Howard finished, he tugged his cuffs and smiled, the smile of a man who believed his own charts. "So, what do you think?" Whitney tilted her head slightly. "Your slide on page 7 shows a revenue projection based on full federal permits for the Nevada site." "That's correct." "You don't have those permits." Howard's smile flickered. "They're in process." "They were denied 4 months ago, Mr. Sterling. Your legal team appealed. The appeal was rejected last Tuesday." The room temperature dropped. Grant's smirk disappeared. Colleen set down her wine glass with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. "How do you know that?" Howard's voice had changed, quieter, careful. Whitney didn't answer the question. She flipped a page in her portfolio and continued. "Your debt-to-equity ratio is 4.3. You have 3 developments stalled in litigation. Your stock has lost 31% in the last quarter, and your largest institutional investor filed to reduce their position 2 weeks ago." She looked up. "I know your numbers better than you do, Mr. Sterling. The question isn't whether I'm qualified to sit at this table. The question is whether you are." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Grant opened his mouth, then closed it. Howard Sterling, a man who had built an empire on the belief that he was the smartest person in any room, sat back down in his chair. Slowly, like the air had been let out of him. And the dinner was just getting started. Dinner was served at 8:15. Roasted lamb with rosemary crust, truffle risotto, a salad that probably cost more per leaf than most people's lunch. The staff moved silently, pouring, placing, disappearing, like ghosts trained to be invisible. Whitney was seated between two empty chairs. Nobody had moved to sit beside her. The 14 guests clustered around Howard and Colleen at the center of the table like planets orbiting their sun. Whitney sat at the edge of the solar system, alone. She didn't mind. Alone was useful. Alone meant she could watch. Howard tried to recover from Whitney's financial dismantling by steering the conversation to safer ground. He talked about the Sterling family legacy, 3 generations of industry, philanthropy, a hospital wing with their name on it. "My grandfather built this company with nothing," Howard said, carving the lamb with theatrical precision. "Nothing but grit and vision. That's what this family represents. Grit." Whitney noted that his grandfather had also built the company with a significant amount of segregated labor contracts, but she kept that to herself. Grant, meanwhile, had found his second wind. 2 glasses of Bordeaux had brought his smirk back. He leaned across the table toward Whitney, elbows planted in a way that Colleen would normally scold him for. "So, Whitney, can I call you Whitney? Tell me something." He swirled his wine. "Where did you go to school? Community college? Some kind of program?" "Wharton, then Columbia for my MBA." Grant's swirl slowed. "Huh, Wharton." He said it the way someone says the name of a restaurant they don't believe you could afford. "Well, they let anyone in these days." A guest to his left, a man named Phil Archer, investment banker, old friend of Howard's, laughed into his napkin. Colleen smiled her glass-cutting smile. Whitney took a bite of lamb, chewed slowly, said nothing. The evening continued. Howard presented more slides, market analyses, partnership synergies, a 5-year roadmap that depended entirely on money he didn't have. He narrated each slide like a professor lecturing a freshman class, pausing after every point to check if Whitney was following along. "This is our projected IRR," he said, tapping the screen. "Internal rate of return. Do you know what that means?" "I do. Of course, just making sure we're on the same page." He smiled. The smile of a man explaining a lawnmower to someone he assumed had never seen grass. Whitney let it pass. She let all of it pass. Every condescending pause, every over-explained acronym, every glance between Howard and Colleen that said, "Can you believe we have to do this?" Then Colleen made her move. It happened during the main course. The water pitcher near Whitney's end of the table was empty. Colleen noticed, not because she was thirsty, but because she saw an opportunity. "Whitney, dear," Colleen's voice was honey poured over broken glass. "Since you're right there by the kitchen, would you mind terribly refilling the pitcher? The staff seems to have disappeared." The table went still, not shocked, expectant, like they'd been waiting for someone to say it. Whitney looked at the empty pitcher, looked at Colleen, looked at the 14 faces watching her. She stood up, picked up the pitcher, walked to the kitchen, filled it with ice water, came back, walked around the table, slowly, deliberately, and filled every single glass. Howard's, Colleen's, Grant's, Phil Archer's, every last one. She set the pitcher down, returned to her seat, folded her napkin across her lap. "Anything else?" Whitney asked. Her voice was perfectly level. Grant grinned. "See, Dad? She's a natural." Colleen patted Whitney's arm as she sat. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's very kind." Under the table, Whitney's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen below the tablecloth. Roland Hayes. "They have no idea, do they?" Whitney typed back with one thumb. "Not yet, but they're giving me everything I need." She put the phone away and returned her attention to the table. Howard was back at his slides, talking about a strategic land acquisition in Nevada. 200,000 acres of desert he planned to convert into the largest solar farm on the eastern seaboard. "The permits are locked in," he said confidently. "We're just waiting on final approval." Whitney knew 3 things Howard didn't. First, those permits had been denied. Twice. Second, the Environmental Review Board that controlled the approval process had an advisory committee. Third, Whitney sat on that committee. She filed it away. Like everything else tonight. Filed and cataloged and stored with surgical precision. On the wall behind Howard, a framed photograph caught her eye. The Sterling family shaking hands with a United States senator. Big smiles. Campaign fundraiser, probably. The senator's name was on a rezoning petition Whitney had been asked to review last month. She hadn't made up her mind on that petition yet. Until now. The lamb grew cold. The wine kept flowing. The insults kept coming. Smaller now, subtler, the kind that hide inside compliments. You speak so well. Your people must be so proud. It's refreshing to see someone like you in this world. Whitney absorbed every word, recorded every slight. The Sterlings were performing their own autopsy and didn't even know it. By 9:30, the dinner plates were cleared. Howard suggested they move to his study for the real conversation. Whitney stood, smoothed her dress, and followed them down the hallway, her leather portfolio tucked under her arm, her expression unchanged. She had learned everything she came to learn. Now it was time to use it. Howard's study smelled like old leather and ambition. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, first editions nobody had read, bought by the yard to fill the space. A mahogany desk the size of a small country. Oil paintings of Sterling men going back 3 generations, each one staring down at whoever entered like they owned them. Howard settled into his chair behind the desk. Colleen perched on the arm of a couch. Grant sprawled across a wingback chair with his 3rd glass of Bordeaux, legs crossed, one loafer bouncing. Phil Archer and 2 other guests followed. The inner circle, the trusted few who were supposed to witness the closing of the century. Whitney took the chair nobody offered her, a straight-backed wooden seat near the door, the kind of chair you give someone you expect to leave soon. She set her portfolio on her lap, unopened, waited. Howard launched into phase 2 of his pitch, the real numbers, the confidential projections. He pulled out a bound presentation, leather cover, gold embossing, Sterling Group, Strategic Vision 2025 to 2030, and slid it across the desk toward Whitney. This is the full picture, he said. Everything Apex Meridian needs to see. Growth trajectory, asset valuation, partnership structure. I think you'll find our position is stronger than the market suggests. Whitney opened the presentation, turned pages slowly. Her face revealed nothing. Not interest, not boredom, not the fact that she had already seen every number in this document 3 weeks ago and found 17 errors. She stopped on page 12. A chart showing the Sterling Group's subsidiary structure, a web of holding companies, LLCs, and offshore entities that looked like a plate of spaghetti drawn by a drunk accountant. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "tell me about Cascade Holdings." Howard's pen stopped moving. "What about it?" "Cascade Holdings is a subsidiary registered in Delaware. It doesn't appear in your public filings, but it holds the deed to 47,000 acres in northern Nevada." The room changed. Not the temperature, the pressure. Like the altitude had shifted and nobody's ears had popped yet. That's an internal matter," Howard said, "not relevant to this discussion." "It's relevant if those 47,000 acres are the collateral for the $200 million loan you took from Pacific Western Bank last March, a loan that's currently in technical default because the land appraisal came in 60% below what you reported." Grant's loafer stopped bouncing. Phil Archer leaned forward and whispered something to Howard. Howard waved him off. "I don't know where you're getting your information," Howard said, "but I assure you, I'm getting it from your own filings, Mr. Sterling, the ones you submitted to the SEC, cross-referenced with the county assessor's records in Washoe County, Nevada. It took my team about 4 hours." Whitney turned another page in his presentation, calmly, like she was browsing a magazine at a dentist's office. "Your slide on page 14 projects an 18% annual return based on full operational capacity of the Nevada Solar Project. But the environmental impact study was rejected by the Federal Review Board in February. Your appeal was denied. The project is frozen." Howard opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "we should wait for your senior partner to discuss these details." Whitney looked at him for a long moment. "There is no senior partner coming, Mr. Sterling." She reached into her portfolio and pulled out a folder. Not the glossy, gold-embossed kind. A plain manila folder, thick with papers, edges bent from use. She opened it on the desk. Inside, annotated financials covered in red ink, margin notes in tight, precise handwriting, post-it tabs color-coded by risk category, a complete forensic analysis of the Sterling Group's actual financial position. 3 months of work, laid out in silence on Howard Sterling's mahogany desk. Howard stared at the folder, at the red ink, at the post-it tabs. He was looking at his own empire through someone else's eyes, and for the first time, he could see the cracks. "Ms. Dawson," he said. His voice had dropped half an octave. "I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot tonight." Grant tried to recover. He sat up, uncrossed his legs, attempted the kind of charming smile that had gotten him through Harvard on half-effort. "Look, Whitney, I think what my father is trying to say is—"
"Mr. Sterling!"
Whitney's voice was quiet, but it filled the room the way a blade fills a wound. "Your existing debt covenant with Pacific Western contains a cross-default clause. If the Nevada land position is revalued, and it will be, every loan in your portfolio triggers simultaneously. Your entire credit facility collapses." Grant's charming smile died on his face. The room was silent, the kind of silence that has weight. Phil Archer stared at his shoes. Colleen's fingers were white around her wine glass. Whitney's phone buzzed. She glanced at it. "Excuse me for a moment." She stepped into the hallway. The caller ID read Eleanor Voss, 78 years old. Legendary. The woman who had built 3 investment banks and burned down 2 others. Whitney's mentor since business school. "How's dinner?" Eleanor's voice was dry, amused. "Exactly as we predicted." "The son?" "Worse." Eleanor laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Good. Then you know everything you need to know. Trust your gut, Whitney. You've never been wrong about people." Whitney hung up, stood in the hallway for a moment. Through the study door, she could hear Grant's voice, low, panicked, arguing with his father. The words, "damage control," floated through the crack. She straightened her dress, walked back in, sat down in the wooden chair by the door, and waited for them to finish digging. When Whitney walked back into the study, the room had changed. Grant was standing behind his father's chair, both hands gripping the leather back. Phil Archer was on his phone in the corner, typing furiously. Colleen sat rigid on the couch, ankles crossed, jaw locked. A woman holding herself together through sheer force of posture. And Howard. Howard was behind his desk, laptop open, face lit blue by the screen. He was staring at a Forbes article dated 18 months ago. The headline read, "Whitney Dawson, the quiet architect of a $14 billion empire." The photograph showed Whitney in a charcoal blazer, standing on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Arms crossed. No smile. Looking directly into the camera like she was reading your thoughts and finding them wanting. Howard turned the laptop toward Colleen. Her hand went to her mouth, not slowly, fast like catching a scream. Grant grabbed the laptop, scrolled, read the first paragraph out loud, his voice cracking on every other word. Whitney Dawson, 44, founder and CEO of Apex Meridian Capital, oversees $14 billion in clean energy assets and is considered one of the most influential figures in American infrastructure finance. Her personal net worth is estimated at... He stopped, swallowed. $2.1 billion. The laptop screen reflected in Grant's eyes. The same eyes that had told her to get her black ass out of the chair 3 hours ago. "This can't be right," Colleen whispered, but her face said she already knew it was. Howard stood, slowly, the way a man stands when the ground beneath him has shifted and he's not sure it's finished moving. "Ms. Dawson," his voice was stripped bare. No charm, no authority, just a man who had just realized he'd been spitting in the face of the only person who could save him. "I owe you an apology." Whitney held up one hand, open palm. "Stop." "Mr. Sterling, I accepted this dinner personally, not because your deal interested me, although it did before tonight. I accepted because I wanted to see who I'd be partnering with." She stood. Not dramatically, not with flair. She simply rose from the wooden chair by the door. The chair nobody had offered. the chair meant for someone who didn't belong. And she walked to the center of the room. "I want to make sure I have this right," she said. "When I arrived, your son told me the kitchen was that way. He told me to grab a pitcher. He told me to get my black ass out of a seat. Your wife called me a stray. Then she asked me to pour water, and I did. I poured water for every person at that table." She paused. Let the words settle. "Your son called my position a diversity quota. Your husband explained what IRR stands for to the woman who wrote the textbook chapter on infrastructure return modeling that Wharton currently uses in its second-year curriculum." Phil Archer put his phone down. His face was gray. "And when I demonstrated that I knew more about your company than your own CFO does, your husband asked to wait for my senior partner. Because certainly someone who looks like me couldn't possibly be the one making decisions." Howard's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "In my world, Mr. Sterling, and it is my world whether your family accepts that or not, how you treat someone when you think they can't help you tells me everything I need to know about how you'll behave when they can." Grant stepped forward. His face was flushed red, caught somewhere between shame and the reflex to defend himself. "Look, it was just talk. Nobody meant anything by it. You have to understand, we didn't know who you—" "That's the point, Mr. Sterling." Whitney's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You didn't know. And the things you said when you didn't know are the truest things you said all night." Grant opened his mouth, closed it. His father put a hand on his arm, and Grant flinched like he'd been burned. Colleen stood from the couch. Her composure was cracking, small fissures around her eyes, the skin around her lips tight and pale. "Ms. Dawson, what I said earlier, I didn't mean—" "Mrs. Sterling." Whitney looked at her, not with anger, not with satisfaction, with something worse, clarity. The look of a woman who saw you exactly as you were and had already made her decision. "You called me a stray, in your own home, in front of your guests, at a dinner you invited me to." Colleen sat back down, like her strings had been cut. The study was silent. The grandfather clock on the far wall ticked. Each tick sounded like a door closing. Howard gripped the edge of his desk. His knuckles were white. The patriarch, the empire builder, the man who had never in his life asked anyone for anything. He was about to beg. "Ms. Dawson, please." His voice was barely above a whisper. "We can start over. New terms, better terms, whatever you need. This deal is everything to us. Without it, you lose everything." Whitney finished his sentence for him. "I know. I've read your balance sheet. I know exactly what happens if this deal falls through." She picked up her leather portfolio from the wooden chair, tucked it under her arm, smoothed the front of her navy dress. "I came here tonight with every intention of signing. $600 million, your company saved, your family's legacy preserved. All you had to do was treat me like a human being." She looked around the room one last time, at the oil paintings of sterling men on the walls, at the first editions no one had read, at the mahogany desk and the crystal decanters and the gold-embossed presentations, at the people who owned all of it and deserved none of it. "You couldn't even do that." The words landed like a verdict, final, unappealable, and Whitney Dawson turned toward the door. Whitney's hand was on the door handle when Howard Sterling's voice broke. "Wait!" She didn't turn around. Her fingers rested on the brass handle, cold metal. She waited. "Please." Howard crossed the study in 4 steps. His shoes clicked on the hardwood. Fast, desperate, the sound of a man chasing something he'd already lost. "Ms. Dawson, please, name your terms, any terms. We'll restructure the entire proposal tonight, right now. Whatever it takes." Whitney turned, slowly, the way someone turns to look at a car wreck they've already passed. "The deal is off the table, Mr. Sterling." 4 words. Each one landed like a nail in a coffin. Howard's face collapsed, not all at once, in stages. First the eyes, then the jaw, then the shoulders, like watching a building demolition in slow motion, floor by floor. "You can't," Grant started. "I can." Whitney's voice was calm, the kind of calm that doesn't negotiate. And I am. Colleen stood from the couch, finally, moved toward Whitney. Her heels clicked on the floor and she stopped 3 feet away, close enough to plead, too proud to touch. Ms. Dawson, Whitney, think about what you're doing. This is $600 million. Surely we can find some middle... Mrs. Sterling, you asked me to pour water. You called me a stray. You questioned whether a black woman could be a CEO. Whitney tilted her head. And now you want me to find the middle ground? Colleen's mouth tightened into a thin, white line. She stepped back. Whitney opened her portfolio one final time. She pulled out a single sheet of paper, a printed memo on Apex Meridian letterhead, and placed it on Howard's desk. This is what you should be worried about. Howard picked it up, read it. His face went from pale to gray to white. Your Nevada land deal, Whitney said. 200,000 acres, $200 million invested. The entire project depends on federal environmental clearance from the National Clean Energy Review Board. Howard looked up from the memo. His eyes were wet. Apex Meridian Capital holds an advisory seat on that board. I personally sit on the clearance committee. Your application crossed my desk 6 weeks ago. The sound that came from Grant's throat was not a word. It was the sound of a man realizing that the woman he'd told to pour water held the keys to his family's survival. Without that clearance, Whitney continued, your $200 million Nevada investment is frozen, indefinitely, which triggers the cross-default clause in your Pacific Western loan, which collapses your credit facility, which means... We know what it means. Howard's voice was a whisper. Then you understand. I wasn't just your best option for the $600 million, Mr. Sterling. She closed the portfolio, slid it under her arm. I was your only option, for everything. The grandfather clock ticked. Once, twice, 3 times. Grant's hands were shaking. He gripped the back of a chair to stop them. You can't do this to us. You can't just walk in here and... I didn't do anything to you, Mr. Sterling. Whitney looked at him, really looked at him for the first and last time. You did this to yourselves. 3 hours ago, the moment I walked through your door. She stepped toward the hallway, then paused, one hand on the doorframe. She turned back, not to Howard, not to Grant, but to the wall behind the desk, to the framed photograph. The Sterling family shaking hands with a United States senator. Big smiles. Campaign fundraiser, probably. The senator's name was on a rezoning petition Whitney had been asked to review last month. One more thing, she said. That senator in the photograph, Senator Whitfield, he called me last week, asked my professional opinion on your family's rezoning petition for the Nevada property. Howard's breath caught. I hadn't made up my mind until tonight. She let the sentence hang in the air like smoke. Then Whitney Dawson walked out of the study, down the hallway, past the dining room where 14 guests sat in stunned silence. They had heard everything through the walls. Past the foyer with its chandelier and its marble floors and its oil paintings of men who had built their fortune on the backs of people who looked exactly like her. She opened the front door herself. No valet this time. The October air hit her face, cool, sharp, clean. She walked to the Honda Accord parked between a Bentley and a Range Rover. Behind her, through the open door, she heard the sound of Howard Sterling's fist hitting his mahogany desk. Then Colleen's voice, high and breaking. What did you do? What did you do? Then Grant, quieter than she'd heard him all night. We're finished. We're finished. Whitney started the engine. The Honda's dashboard glowed soft blue. She sat for a moment, both hands on the wheel, breathed in, breathed out. Then she pulled out of the gravel drive and disappeared into the dark, taking the $600 million deal and the Sterling family's last hope with her. The Sterling empire didn't collapse overnight. It took exactly 11 days. Day 1. Howard Sterling called Whitney's office 17 times. Her assistant answered each call with the same 6 words. Ms. Dawson is not available. Day 2. Howard sent flowers, peonies and white roses, arranged in a crystal vase that cost $400. Whitney's assistant donated them to the hospital across the street. Day 3. Grant Sterling flew to New York, showed up at Apex Meridian's headquarters on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Midtown. He asked to see Whitney. The receptionist, a young black woman in a navy blazer, told him Ms. Dawson was in Singapore. She wasn't. She was on the 38th floor reviewing the very documents that would end his family's company. Day 4. Colleen Sterling wrote a letter. 3 pages, handwritten on cream stationery. She apologized for the dinner, for the water pitcher, for the word stray. She did not apologize for people like you don't sit at tables like this. Either she forgot she said it or she still believed it. Whitney read the letter once, filed it in a drawer, did not respond. Day 7. Pacific Western Bank called in the Sterling Group's loan. The Nevada land appraisal had been revised, down 63% from what Howard had reported. The cross-default clause activated like a row of dominoes falling in slow motion. 3 credit facilities, 2 revolving lines, a bridge loan that was supposed to carry them to the Apex deal that no longer existed. Day 9. The Wall Street Journal broke the story. Front page below the fold. Sterling Group loses landmark $600 million clean energy deal. The article didn't name Whitney directly, but anyone in the industry could read between the lines. Sterling stock dropped 18% before lunch. Day 11. The board acted. Grant Sterling was removed from his position, not gently, not with a golden parachute, but with a security escort and a cardboard box. Howard Sterling stepped down as chairman. The official statement said, for health reasons. Everyone knew the real reason was a quiet black woman in a navy dress who had poured their water and taken their future. The Sterling estate in Westchester went on the market 3 weeks later. Listed at $14 million. It would sell for $9 million. Meanwhile, Whitney Dawson did what Whitney Dawson always did. She moved forward. She redirected the $600 million investment to a consortium of 3 firms, 2 minority-owned clean energy companies, and a tribal nation's solar cooperative in Arizona. The deal closed in 11 days, a record for that fund size. The consortium's CEO, a woman named Grace Holloway, called Whitney on closing day. "They told me this kind of money doesn't go to people like us," Grace said. "It does now," Whitney replied. The Financial Times published a profile 2 weeks later. The woman who walked away from $600 million, and why it made her more powerful. The article detailed how Whitney's decision had attracted 3 new institutional investors to Apex Meridian, adding $2.3 billion in new commitments. Walking away from the Sterlings hadn't cost her. It had made her untouchable. And then there was the valet, the young man who had asked Whitney if she was with the catering company on the night she arrived. His name was Derek Collins, 23 years old, working nights at the Sterling estate to save money for community college. 3 weeks after the dinner, Derek sent an email through Apex Meridian's general contact page. It was 4 sentences long. He apologized, said he'd replayed the moment every day since, said he wanted to be better. Whitney's office responded within 24 hours, not with a form letter, with a full scholarship offer through the Apex Meridian Foundation. Tuition, books, housing, and a paid summer internship at the firm's Denver office. Derek Collins started at the University of Colorado that fall. Finance major, full ride. He kept the acceptance letter pinned above his desk for 4 years. Next to a printout of a Forbes article about a woman who built a $14 billion empire and still drove a 6-year-old Honda Accord. 6 months after the dinner that ended the Sterling empire, Whitney Dawson stood behind a podium at the National Clean Energy Summit in Washington, D.C. 3,000 people filled the auditorium. Investors, policymakers, engineers, journalists. A standing room crowd that had come to hear the woman the Financial Times called the most powerful voice in American infrastructure. She didn't talk about the Sterlings. She didn't name them. She didn't need to. Everyone in the room already knew the story. Instead, she told a different one. "When I was 12 years old," Whitney said, "my mother worked 2 jobs, cleaned offices at night, ran a daycare out of our living room during the day. She never made more than $31,000 a year. The auditorium was silent. One night I asked her why she worked so hard when nobody seemed to notice. She looked at me and said, "Whitney, people not noticing is not the same as it not mattering. You do the work because the work matters. And one day someone will see you. But by then, you won't need them to." Whitney paused. Let her mother's words settle over 3,000 people. I built Apex Meridian on that principle. $14 billion under management. Not because I wanted to prove anyone wrong, but because the work mattered. Clean energy matters. Infrastructure matters. And who gets to sit at the table? That matters too. She gripped the edges of the podium. The most expensive mistake in business isn't a bad investment. It isn't a market downturn or a missed quarter. The most expensive mistake is underestimating someone because of what they look like, because of where they come from, because of the color of their skin. That mistake costs more than money. It costs you the future. The applause started before she finished the sentence. It began in the front row, a slow, deliberate clap from Eleanor Voss, 78 years old, seated in a wheelchair she refused to acknowledge, still sharp as a scalpel. The clap spread, row by row, section by section, until 3,000 people were on their feet. Whitney stepped back from the podium, nodded once. No wave, no victory lap. In the third row, a girl sat between her mother and an empty seat. 14 years old, black, hair in braids, wearing a blazer she'd borrowed from her older sister because she wanted to look professional. Her name was Amara. She had won a regional science competition and received a ticket to the summit as her prize. Amara had not blinked during Whitney's entire speech. After the event, the crowd pressed toward the stage. Business cards, handshakes, camera flashes. Whitney moved through them with practiced patience. A nod here, a word there, never stopping long enough to be caught. Then she saw Amara. The girl was standing at the edge of the crowd, clutching a notebook against her chest. Too shy to push forward, too determined to leave. Whitney walked to her, knelt down so they were eye to eye. "What's your name?" "Amara." "What do you want to be, Amara?" The girl didn't hesitate. "I want to build things, big things, things that matter." Whitney reached into her pocket, pulled out a business card, the same cream-colored embossed card she had slid across Howard Sterling's table 6 months ago. She pressed it into Amara's hand. "Call me when you're ready." Amara looked at the card, looked at Whitney, nodded, not like a child, but like someone making a promise she intended to keep. Whitney stood, smoothed her dress, the same navy dress or one exactly like it, walked toward the exit. No entourage, no bodyguards, no fanfare. Outside, the Honda Accord waited in the parking garage. Same gray paint, same 6 years of dents and highway miles. She tossed her portfolio onto the passenger seat, started the engine, and pulled into the D.C. traffic. Whitney Dawson didn't walk into that dinner to prove anything. She walked in already knowing exactly who she was. The only people who needed convincing were the ones too blind to see it. And by the time they saw it, it was already too late.
Whitney poured that water. She absorbed every sound, and then she went out, talking $600 million and the Sterling family's entire future with her. And the Sterlings didn't lose their empire to a bad deal or a market crash. They lost it to their own contempt. But Whitney sat at the table for 3 hours. She let Grant explain what IRR means to the women who literally wrote a textbook on it. She gave them every chance to see her. They couldn't, not because she was invincible, but because they had already decided what a black woman in a simple dress was allowed to be. And that blindness didn't just cost them $600 million, it cost them everything, because power doesn't always look the way you expect. And the moment you decide someone is beneath you, you've already told them exactly who you are. And that leaves us with something worth sitting with. And if the person you overlook today holds the key to everything you need tomorrow. And the deeper question, when someone treats you as invincible, does that reveal your worth or theirs? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every one. If this story hit you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next, because the most expensive mistake you will ever make is underestimating the quiet one.